every Monday night from 7 to 8 o'clock. Thank you for being with us. This is Devil's Radio, the Shaw, 92.7 FM, 101 FM, 540 AM. And we are here on the Monday night before the Strawberry Supermoon Tuesday. So tomorrow night, hopefully it'll be nice and clear and you can go out and see a supermoon. So make sure you do that on this beautiful, coming up here on the end of spring. So folks, we have been talking about democracy in Wisconsin since we went on. And I'm delighted to have Alexia Sabor with us tonight. She is running for the position of Wisconsin Secretary of State. And, you know, we're going to find out what that is. So good evening, Alexia. How are you?
I'm fine, Mark. Thank you so much for having me this evening. I'm delighted to be here.
It's terrific. So before we get into the race that you're in and the office that you're running for, why don't you just tell the voters a little bit, right? Voters, hopefully they're all voting. You hear that, folks? Vote, vote, vote. Register to vote and vote. But tell these folks, my listeners, a little bit about you, where you grew up, you know, where you went to school.
Absolutely. So I moved to, like a lot of people, I moved to Madison for school and never left. My family, actually, my maternal side of the family actually is from Wisconsin. My great-grandparents immigrated to the United States from Greece and settled in the Sheboygan area, where my grandfather owned a candy and ice cream shop back around the 1910s to the early 1920s. And they later moved down to Illinois, which is where my great-grandparents settled here. My grandmother was born in the Sheboygan area. And then while she was in elementary school, they moved down to Illinois, which is where my parents and I were both born. And then when I was thinking about graduate school, I went to my undergraduate education was at Loyola University in Chicago, and I was an anthropology major. And I was interested in studying natural resources as a graduate student. So I looked all around the country and visited a bunch of schools. And I absolutely fell in love with Wisconsin. I loved the fact that even though Madison was an urban place, I could be outside in green space in 20 minutes. The environmental studies programs here through the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies are unparalleled. And I came and I stayed, and then I went on to work for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and the Wisconsin Department of Family Services, the Wisconsin Wetlands Association, which is an environmental nonprofit. And I did a PhD in forest ecology and management. I studied the effects of residential housing growth in rural parts of our state on timber harvest and forest ecology. And most recently, I worked as a project reporter for a small tech company here in Madison.
It sounds like, just listening, it's a fascinating background. Sounds like you've also really learned a lot about Wisconsin and a lot of the key issues that we face in terms of what's global warming going to be doing with us, right? How do we keep our forests in shape? How do we have family farms? And how do we have fresh water? So
yes,
like
absolutely.
You really have a background in policy and all this stuff. So how'd you get into politics?
Well, I had thought for a long time that I might someday want to run for office, right? Because although in the scientific community, the idea that you would be involved in politics has not historically been considered very popular. There's concern that compromises your ability to be more removed from the results because you're taking an advocate's position. But I always recognize that the way that science matters is through policy, right? The science is great, it's interesting on its own, but unless we do something with it, it's not really that meaningful. And so I had long thought about that as a possibility. And in 2017, in 2016, I applied to train with an organization called Emerge Wisconsin, which trains Democratic women to run for office and win. And while I was there, the other people going through the program and we would talk about the Democratic Party and things that it was or was not doing that we didn't care for. And the executive director of the Emerge Wisconsin program said to us, look, you know who's the Democratic Party? You're the Democratic Party. So if you don't like something where you think something needs to be done and it's not being done, you got to go to your county party meetings and show up and do the work. So I listened. And I showed up at my county party meetings and I started working with the communications committee. And, through that, I became familiar with all of the various aspects of the work that the county party was doing because everything needs to be communicated or it's essentially as good as didn't happen, right? So everything went through us. And then in 2019, the former chair decided that he was not going to run for another term. And so I ran to be county party chair, and I am now in my second term as county party chair.
And those terms are 2-year terms?
They are 2 years. Yep.
And so you are the current county party chair for Dane County.
That is correct.
And now you're running for the position of Wisconsin Secretary of State.
That is right.
So the Secretary of State is sort of this invisible office, I think. A lot of us really don't know what the person that has that position does. So why don't you describe what the position really is and how you see it, and then why you want to sit in that seat?
Yeah, absolutely. You're totally right. It's a seat where a lot of people don't really have a good understanding of it. And I will say that in Wisconsin, it is not a seat that is especially powerful. In fact, our Secretary of State has the least power of any of the 50 secretaries of state in the United States. So when you say that, what does that mean in terms of a practical matter? Yeah, I'll talk about what it does.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and then I'll talk a little bit more about what it might do. So,
and by that, what you might do with it.
What I might do with it, or alternatively, Republicans also have some ideas about what they would like to do with this seat that I don't necessarily agree with.
Okay, I got you. All right.
Yeah. So, one of the things that this seat does is to manage many of the state's official records. The Secretary of State has a key role to play in ensuring that our state's records are kept and filed appropriately and are accessible to the public. This office also produces things called apostilles, which is a specific form of document that is required by certain countries to have Wisconsin businesses do business overseas and to complete overseas adoptions. And then this seat also serves as a member of the Board of Commissioners of Public Lands, which are more than 77,000 acres of forest that are put in trust and managing trust funds of more than $1 billion that primarily is for the benefit of Wisconsin public school libraries. These funds are actually the sole source of state funding for public school libraries, and in many of the school districts in our state, they are the only source of funding for the public school libraries. And these trust funds can also be used for public works and some of them go into the University of Wisconsin system. So, as opposed to many other states, our Secretary of State does not play a role in certifying elections. It did at one time. And progressively over the last 40 years, there have been a number of responsibilities that have been removed from this office and placed elsewhere. The role of certifying elections was previously taken from the Secretary of State's office, put into the Government Accountability Board. Later on, the Government Accountability Board was removed, was disbanded by the Republican legislature. The Wisconsin Elections Commission was put in place. And now there is talk from the Republicans about putting the Secretary of State as the only person who certifies Wisconsin's elections results.
So we're coming up on our first break, and we'll come back after the break and really focus in on what you see your goals are for that office and where the fight's going to come down in terms of on elections, particularly. But the fact that the Secretary of State sits on the board of commissioners of the public lands, I don't think a lot of people really know that. 77,000 acres is not an insignificant amount of public land. And just briefly on that, how do you see expanding or influencing your role in that capacity? Because it didn't sound like you wanted to move that off of your responsibility.
No, I absolutely don't want to move that off of my responsibility. I studied timber harvest in northern Wisconsin, and that is the primary source of revenue from these public lands that feeds into the trust. And I'm also a former PTO president of a Madison Public School that was a high need school. So I completely appreciate the need to ensure that those funds continue to go to our schools.
So terrific. So you would want to expand that role and not diminish it, right?
Absolutely not diminish it. And my concern would be that a Republican in this seat might wish to diminish or disband that role.
And or sell off our public lands.
Exactly.
Frankly, I'm concerned about that as a homeowner up in Washira County. But anyway, folks, we are going to go to break. This is the Paul Revere Show. This is attorney Mark Thompson. And we will be back on the other side of this break with Alexia Sabor. We're back from break. We are here with Alexia Sabor, who is a candidate for Secretary of State. Election is coming up in August, the primary. And so, Alexia, we know that you're qualified for this position. We know that your degrees serve the public purpose. So what does this race have to say about politics in Wisconsin, democracy in Wisconsin, and elections in Wisconsin at this point in time?
Yeah, so, Republicans want to take this seat, as I mentioned previously before the break, and have the Secretary of State be the person who certifies election results. I think that's a terrible idea. I think it's a terrible idea whether it's a Democrat or a Republican in the seat, right? Because no matter who's in the seat, if there's partisan oversight of our elections, people who are in the party that does not control the seat are going to mistrust the process and mistrust the results. And if we cannot even agree who is elected and has the right to make decisions, we can't move forward with literally anything else that we care about. So I don't think that moving election oversight into partisan hands at this point is a good choice for Wisconsin.
So is the current Republican candidate, what is that person saying about the race and about election?
I mean, there are more than one Republican candidate. right now, right? But all of them, I believe, wish to move election oversight to the seat. And in particular, the most likely candidate, I think, to make it through the primary would be former Representative Amy Loudenbeck, and she is definitely in favor of moving that power to this seat.
So as a current commissioner on the Wisconsin Elections Commission, I really share your view that because currently the Wisconsin Election Commission, its staff is nonpartisan. The folks that run the day-to-day staff provide guidance to the municipal clerks, county clerks who actually run elections in Wisconsin. They are in fact nonpartisan. And the calls for, Megan Wolf's resignation are really outrageous because, she's like a superstar around the country, recognized as one of the leading experts on elections, fair elections, safe elections, cyber secure elections. She's got security through the Homeland Security, right? So she has the credentials, and they want to, take her out of the spot even before we get rid of the Wisconsin Elections Commission. So what do you think is behind this push, other than just this raw grab for power, or, grab for raw power, whatever, either way?
Yeah, I don't know that it needs to be anything more than a raw grab for power, right? I think we've seen time and time again that the Republicans are interested in nothing more than a ruthless dismantling of our democratic processes and systems, and limiting the right to vote and impeding election integrity, right? I've been hearing, as I'm talking to people across the state, from clerks that are coming under attack because they're just trying to do their job with integrity and according to Wisconsin statute. And a lot of these people aren't even Democrats, right? They're Republicans, and they're still coming under attack. And I'm hearing from people, like I heard from a clerk in Waukesha County, that they were finding it difficult to complete other parts of their job because there's so much effort to impede progress on the elections that they're not able to get to the other parts of their job. So it doesn't serve anybody except a very small minority of people who will actually hold that power.
Here's sort of the dynamic, right? If it comes to the place where the law actually puts elections under Secretary of State, then your position becomes even more important than it already is, and in a well-known way. How do you see then being a candidate, and if elected, how do you preserve fair elections and integrity if they in fact give you the power to certify elections? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that one way you do it is by using the seat to communicate more effectively in defense of democracy and to help people understand the attempts to undermine election integrity and infringe on voter rights, right? And to expand the reach of the office by increasing civic engagement through education, because it's really easy for people to mistrust what they don't understand and either choose to be a bystander or, believe the kind of big lie conspiracy theory that Republicans are currently peddling.
Right. And the big lie, meaning that Trump somehow wasn't the biggest loser ever, is the biggest lie. But, the big lie movement has a lot of power. Dean Knutson served on the Wisconsin Election Commission with me. Mm-hmm. Republican, was a friend of Speaker Voss, helped create the Wisconsin Election Commission, and they ran him out of the office and essentially forced him to resign because he told the truth that, Biden won and Trump lost. So I think your point that as the Secretary of State, in the event elections are turned over to you, your bully pulpit is really big. Now you have about 30 seconds. So what's your shout out to all the voters, and why did they vote for you?
Yeah, well, I think that we are missing an opportunity with this office to push back in defense of our democracy and to use it to push back on attempts to infringe on voter rights. And also, I would say that it's really important that we have somebody in this position, in every position for every constitutional office, who is actually out there all in, making the case, affirmative case, not just for themselves, but for Tony Evers and Josh Kaul and the treasurer, and who's ever going to be up against Ron Johnson. Having a strong candidate in every office gives us the best chance to win all the offices.
Thank you all. That was Alexia Sabor.
UI.com.
Well, hello, folks. This is Attorney Mark Thompson. This is the Paul Revere Show. This is the second half of the show. Welcome back. And this is just a friendly reminder, tomorrow night, if it's clear, it is the strawberry supermoon. So make sure you go out there and enjoy it. Show your kids. Smile a little bit. So we are here, and I'm pleased to say that we have Tom Palzewicz with us. And he is running for an office. And this show has always been about democracy in the state of Wisconsin. So I'm going to let you eventually have him tell you what office he's running for. But before we get into it, Tom, say hi to my listeners.
Hello. Yeah, great to be on the show. Thanks for having me, Mark. Appreciate it.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and education, and then we'll find out why you are into politics. A lot of people are like, why would anybody do that? So
yes, some people think it's crazy.
There you go. Who is Tom, right?
So lifelong Wisconsin resident, grew up in the Brown Deer area. My parents are both from the UP, so I've been up to the UP quite a bit. My dad came down here for a job at A.O. Smith. So he used to work in the factory, great place. Mandela Barnes and I often joke, because his grandfather worked there, my dad worked there. So, a lot of great jobs were built there. So, and I grew up in Brown Deer. So, and after high school, I went out to Madison for a couple of years. I like to say I had a great time, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I joined the Navy. So in 1982, I joined the Navy. They said I'd be perfect for a nuclear submarine. So that's what I did. Ended up spending 4 years on a nuclear submarine, traveling around the world, really learning a lot about myself, learned a lot about leadership, learned a lot about respect, how to get along with people with different opinions and different viewpoints. And because one of the interesting things about being on a submarine is you didn't have to like the other 99 guys, but you did have to respect them and what they brought to the table, because my life was in their hands and theirs was in mine. So it was a really important thing that I learned. Then I came back to Wisconsin when I got out of the Navy, and I came back to Wisconsin for one reason. This was the place to raise a family, was the place to come back to. The park system, the school systems, our investment in people and education and resources in the state I just thought fantastic. And I got to travel around the world and see a bunch of places. And I just came back here and I got an accounting degree from UWM, jumped into banking for 15 years. Found out it wasn't really my cup of tea, and then started my own business with my brother doing business coaching and executive coaching. And that's where I still do today. And after that 2016 election, like a lot of other people, I said, I gotta jump in and do something. So I ran against Jim Sensenbrenner in the 5th congressional CD. And it was a learning experience. It was just fantastic. Met a whole bunch of people, learned a lot of things, learned about how to be a candidate and get out there and meet people and greet people and raise money and do all the things you need to do as a candidate. What I really found great was creating relationships with people and created a lot of relationships. And that paid off in the 2012 20 election because Sensenbrenner decided to retire, and I ended up running against Scott Fitzgerald, and I got to leverage those relationships trying to run during a pandemic, which was very difficult. It was a totally different way to run a campaign. And I got into politics, though, because I realized that all of us have a part to play and you need to do what you can do. And I knew I could be a good candidate because I've been public speaking for a while. I read up on the issues, but mostly I listen. And I want to hear what other people bring to the table and what they want to see done. And that's why I decided to run in the state Senate in the 5th district. It's funny because I'm still running in the 5th, but it's the state Senate because this is a really important race. This is the race that's going to determine whether Republicans have a supermajority in the Senate or not. So, and I just think that, the way they've put maps together the way they are today, for a 50-50 state to have one of our houses have a supermajority is just plain wrong. And so I've jumped into this race. It's a winnable race. I think it's a 50-50 race, the way we're running it. And I'm just excited to be able to bring to Madison some of the skills of listening and bringing people together, because I think it can be done. I don't think it's going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it can be done. So,
for the viewers, you ran in some races. These were, gerrymandered districts. And the 5th district is still a gerrymandered district. So from your vantage point as running a couple of times in these districts and losing, what are you learning, though, from the public, particularly, moderate Republicans, independents, and Democrats? What are people really saying about, the far right that is really, really influencing or trying to take over the state?
Well, what I heard the most and what I learned the most, because we took this district that historically had been a 70-30 district, and we ended up turning it into a 60-40 district. Still very gerrymandered, but, we cut that in half. And the common thread that we heard over and over again was Democrats thought they were the only Democrats on their block. So what we did is we really got Democrats to be much more loud and proud. We think our campaign had a lot to do with Governor Evers being in the governor's mansion and President Biden winning that race, because we flipped enough votes in our district to make those two things happen. And it was because people decided enough was enough. They wanted to be heard. They wanted to be felt like their viewpoints were important. And I met a lot of moderates and even a lot of Republicans. We did house parties with Republicans because we wanted to hear from everyone and have a chance to debate policy, not culture war. And I think at the end of the day, that's what people really want. They just want their government to work. They want it to be behind the scenes. They don't want to have to think about it all the time and have it be so divisive. And that's one of the things that we worked hard on, is just saying, here's what we're going to do. Let's not call out the other side for being whatever they are. We just want to get things done. And that's what people want at the end of the day.
So what do you see in this race right now? What are the key issues, and where do you think folks are responding positively to your message?
I think some of the key issues, what people are talking about right now, is the economy. We're at full employment, but there are still a lot of people that are looking for a good or better job. But inflation is just coming up and causing a whole bunch of people problems. And, there's not much the government can do about inflation except push policies that allow price competition. I really wish we could expand Medicaid in this state to create more competition in the healthcare sector. I wish at the national level they would let Medicare negotiate drug prices, because that would help out. But there's not a lot to be done, but it's helping people get through things. And I think the biggest thing I learned on my last couple of campaigns is no matter where you live, there are people that need help. And I think it's important within each district that they identify the people that need help and want to have a way to get out there and be able to help them. And I think the other thing that is top of mind with people is gun violence prevention. They want to see something done. And I think probably the most exasperating thing that people see is that politicians aren't willing to break that gerrymandered basically lock unless over 80% of Americans or 80% of Wisconsinites want to do something about it. There's a lot of issues that, especially in Wisconsin, people agree they want to do. Marijuana, is one of those issues that won't even come up for a vote. Gun violence prevention won't even come up for a vote. Codifying Roe versus Wade protections wouldn't even come up for a vote. And these are things the majority of us in Wisconsin want to see at least a vote happen.
So you pushed a lot of sort of hot button issues. I think let's just touch on what, you mentioned gun violence prevention. And I'm a deer hunter. Our family's had their homestead is up in Washburn County. The family been going up there deer hunting for years and years and years. And there's a lot of, I think, confusion on just like, what safe gun use, hunting, recreational use. And then when you mention gun violence prevention, what does that mean? And how do you see that issue playing out in the Senate race, your 5th District Senate race? And if you're elected, what do we do in Madison? So let's just flesh that out a little bit more, because I don't know if people know what you mean by gun violence prevention.
Yeah, and it's a touchy issue for a lot of people, because there are two, these extreme sides saying I'm going to take all your guns away, which never will happen, and the other side is we should be able to own as many guns and ammunition as everything else as I want to, and there has to be this happy medium. Mark, you said you're a hunter. You probably took a hunter safety course before you were allowed to carry around a weapon in the woods. I know I did when I was young, when I was a hunter. And, the NRA of today is not the NRA from when we grew up. And there's a lot of common sense things that used to happen that no longer happen. I mean, I think Ohio just passed a bill that said teachers don't even need training to carry a weapon in the classroom. And any common sense gun owner who respects guns would never want that to happen. And so here in Wisconsin, there's a lot of people that just want more common sense. There should be background checks. People should have to go through a background check if you want to own a weapon. There should be training. There should be training for a weapon. There should be, at least in my opinion, there should be some kind of insurance that you have to carry if you own a weapon, because that weapon has a chance to harm someone, even if it's not under your control. And, allowing people to have these, massive clips, these 30-round clips, it just doesn't make any sense from a hunter's standpoint. And there's 750,000 hunters that go in the woods every fall, and most of them are very much common sense gun owners, and they would like to see the same protection. So I've had lots of conversations with Republicans who are gun owners on this, and most of them agree.
So what does the Republican opposition have to say?
I think the Republican opposition says that any gun regulation is gun control. And there's a slippery slope to having all our guns taken away, which is just never going to happen. And so it's just, and you saw it, I think, this week play out in the Republicans and the Democrats in the Senate talking about, they're able to come to 5 key points, and 3 of them don't have nothing to do with guns. They're about mental health. We still have a lot of work to do when we talk about guns, because gun regulation does work. It doesn't mean taking away the guns. It means regulating like any other thing that can hurt people.
Fair enough. Are you finding a lot of the doors you're knocking on? I'm assuming you're knocking on some doors.
Yep.
I mean, does this common sense approach resonate to folks at your neighbors?
I think when you get past the rhetoric, it does. And I think that's the challenge with conversation, is we can't have conversations unless we first listen and then we communicate. And it's about not vilifying the other side for having an opinion. It's starting from, okay, tell me more about that and tell me why you believe that, and where's the common ground that we can find. And those are most of the conversations that I end up having, is where's the common ground we can find, because not everybody agrees on everything. Even when I knock on a Democratic door, there's not a full agreement on all the things that need to be solved or can be solved. It's just finding common ground and saying, let's start working on them.
Okay. Well, thank you much. We're coming up to a break, folks. I'm here with Tom Palzewicz. He is running for the Senate District 5 position, Wisconsin Senate District 5. A courageous campaigner. That's all I can say in this modern world. And this is the Devil Radio, folks. This is the Shaw. We will be back momentarily. All right, folks, this is Attorney Mark Thompson. This is the Paul Revere Show. We are here with Tom Palzewicz, running for the 5th Senate District. And while we were on break, folks, we were talking about democracy and the state of democracy in Wisconsin. And so, Tom, you've been watching elections, the fight for democracy, where we go. How do you see that resonating in your campaign? And is that an issue at all in this race, do you think?
I think here's what I end up talking about is I think a lot of people are frustrated by the divisiveness, but not a lot of people understand where that divisiveness is coming from. I'm a huge supporter of ending gerrymandering, but it's really hard to get people on board and understanding what gerrymandering is, but also the ramifications of gerrymandering. And I spend a lot of time talking to people about we need more consistent districts, and we need both parties running in each district. It's one of the reasons I ran those congressional races is we needed another voice in those races. And the most frustrating thing that happened in both those races is my opponents wouldn't debate me because they knew they didn't have to. So we never sat down and talked about the issues side by side and talked about policy. And I think that's the one thing you see that doesn't happen the most in this country right now is there's not a lot of races where people sit down and they talk about the issues and they talk about policy. Mostly now it's personal and it's about culture wars and it's about everything else but what government can do, because sometimes it can't, but what government can do to help solve some of our issues, our bigger picture, long-term issues that the private sector just can't.
So in the 5th district coming up, for the elections, August and November, do you foresee debates or no? Or is this again, we're not going to debate?
I hope so. I hope, I feel confident I will win my primary, but I sure hope that we do have debates. And I've met my opponent, who will be my opponent at that point. I've met him before. But I just don't know, most Republicans I talk to don't feel that debates are necessary when it comes to the election process. And it should be. There should be lots of them, and people and regular people should have a chance to ask questions and get answers from both candidates so they can make up their own mind, so to speak.
Yeah, and I really agree with you, this whole idea of gerrymandering. The maps were rigged more than 10 years ago. And I think part of the issue, a lot of people, if you were 10, now you're 20, and you had no idea that it was rigged. And when you were 10, you certainly weren't thinking about it. Now, and there are a lot of people that are 20, no disrespect for 20-year-olds, but sometimes when you're 20, you're not paying attention. And then all of a sudden you're 30 and you forget that this whole map and this idea of democracy has really shifted. So, but here, I don't want to get into that too much because we have a few more minutes left here. What do you see are the key issues facing you in your campaign? And what are you really focusing on? And what is your message? And put it like this way: why should people vote for Tom?
I think the biggest thing, and this is what I've been running on since I started running, even for Congress, is I'm willing to sit down with anybody at any time and have a conversation to find the common ground that I know exists. And if we can really have people that want to go to Madison and work hard to talk to everybody, which is absolutely my goal, is talk to every single one of my colleagues and find some common ground where we can work together to start a solution. Because problems don't get solved overnight. And I learned a long time ago in business is that you have to start somewhere. and you have to keep moving forward. If it does work, great. If it doesn't work, you got to try something else. But right now we're so polarized that we can't even agree on what the starting point is. And it doesn't have to be a final solution that satisfies both parties. In fact, most of the time, both parties are going to feel left behind a little bit by any solution, but at least it moves the step forward. And that's really why I want to go and utilize those skills of being able to sit down, listen, talk, come to some kind of common ground, and possibly make policy.
So we're going to cut down to the chase for the last few minutes here. What are like your three top campaign issues and why you think they're winners, and why do those issues get you across the finish line?
I think it's the economy. And when I talk about the economy, one of the ways to combat inflation is investing in green energy, because it's going to wean us away from, these oil shocks that, I think Mark, you're probably old enough to remember the inflation of the late 70s and early 80s, the ramifications it had. And it feels like we're sort of there at this point, and it's mostly because of energy. That's one of the things. I think the other ones are big picture wise, education. Are we investing enough in education, and are we protecting those children when they go? And the third one for me is gun violence prevention. And what can we do to make sure that when people are out and about, they feel safe? And there are simple things that we can do that we need to get working on.
So let's just flesh that out a little bit more. We spent a lot of time earlier, the first section, talking about the gun violence prevention. But let's focus on the other two. As a state senator, how do you then impact this issue on inflation? Yeah, I do remember Jimmy Carter's inflation, but I also remember, I think I saw a stat the other day. The price per barrel of oil is about the same, but the price of gas is like $4 more. So this is not inflation. We have straight out greed happening. So, why do you think, I didn't hear you just call it out. I mean, we got some of these oil companies, their profits are crazy. Why aren't we calling them out?
Why aren't we taxing them more?
Hello,
some kind of windfall profit tax. The United Kingdom did it, and if the United Kingdom can do it, we can do it.
Yeah, well, not only that, Eisenhower was a big Republican, and he taxed the very wealthy at 90%, and everything worked pretty well for the middle class. I mean, why? We're talking about some oil companies and runaway profits. It certainly seems that we can move the money towards the middle class.
Yeah, and in the meantime, I think there's a lot we can do on sustainability and green energy jobs. And those are things that I think from a statewide perspective, we can have solar farms. We can do a whole bunch of things that are going to, slowly decrease our use of fossil fuels, which is going to benefit everyone in the long run.
I'll give you 10 seconds before we got to wrap up here. What's your 10-second ask of all the voters? Viewers?
It's simple. This is an incredibly important race. Go to tomforwi.com. You can learn more about our campaign. Campaigns need volunteers, campaigns need money, campaigns need support. This is an incredibly important race in Wisconsin, if and only if it keeps the Republicans from having a supermajority in the Senate, which then it doesn't matter who wins the governorship. And I just personally think that's wrong in a 50-50 state.
Thank you so much, Tom. Folks, you heard it here on the Paul Revere Show. Vote